At 7:42 a.m., on August 17, 1943, James McKenna watches Lieutenant Robert Hayes climb into the cockpit of his P-38 Lightning for what might be his last flight. The sun beats down mercilessly on the airfield somewhere in the South Pacific, and McKenna's hands are still greasy from the pre-flight inspection. He knows something the young pilot doesn't. The statistics are damning. P-38 pilots are dying at a rate that makes no tactical sense. The Japanese Zero has turned these skies into an American graveyard for months now. The pattern has been sickeningly consistent. American pilots, trained and confident, take off in aircraft that should dominate the Pacific theater. Hours later, if they return at all, they come back shaken, traumatized, reporting the same impossible story. The Zero simply outturns them, every time, without exception. McKenna has buried 5 friends this week alone. 5 men whose engines he maintained, whose aircraft he certified as flight-ready, whose faces still haunt him when the tropical night falls over the base. The official explanation is simple: pilot error. The official doctrine is clear: never engage a Zero in turning combat. Use the P-38's superior speed and firepower. Hit and run. But combat doesn't follow doctrine, and the Japanese pilots know exactly how to force American flyers into the kind of knife fight where the Lightning becomes a death trap. Lieutenant Hayes is 22 years old. He survived 6 missions through a combination of luck and following orders to the letter. But McKenna knows that luck is a finite resource in war, and orders written in air-conditioned offices thousands of miles away don't account for the reality of combat at 300 miles per hour with tracers tearing through the air around you. What troubles McKenna most isn't what he sees, it's what he feels. For weeks now, he's been conducting his own unauthorized investigation, staying late after the day crews leave, examining control cables with the kind of obsessive attention that borders on paranoia. He's a maintenance technician, not an engineer. He doesn't have degrees or authority or permission to question design decisions made by Lockheed's finest minds. But he has hands-on experience and a growing suspicion that something fundamental is wrong with the P-38's control system. The pilot's complaints are too consistent to be coincidence. Sluggish response, delayed reaction in critical moments. That fatal half-second where the aircraft doesn't respond quite fast enough, where the Zero completes its turn and lines up the killing shot. McKenna has found something, a small thing, an almost invisible thing. But in aerial combat, small differences mean everything. The question now isn't whether he's right, it's whether he has the courage to act on what he knows, to break regulations that exist for good reasons, to risk court-martial for the chance to save lives that the system seems willing to sacrifice to bureaucratic protocol. The P-38 Lightning should be invincible. 2 Allison engines producing over 3,000 horsepower combined, 450 caliber machine guns, and a 20mm cannon concentrated in the nose. Speed exceeding 400 miles per hour in level flight. Heavy armor protecting the pilot. On every technical specification sheet, the Lightning outclasses the Mitsubishi A6M0 in almost every category, except the one that matters most. The Zero turns like a hawk chasing a sparrow. Its lightweight construction and enormous wing surface allow it to pivot in impossibly tight circles, bleeding off speed in ways that should be aerodynamically disadvantageous but prove devastatingly effective in combat. Japanese pilots have spent years perfecting their tactics, understanding instinctively what American training manuals try to teach through diagrams and bullet points. In a turning fight, the aircraft that completes the circle first controls the engagement. Lieutenant Robert Hayes knows this. Every American pilot knows this. They're briefed before every mission, reminded constantly, warned explicitly, do not engage the Zero in turning combat under any circumstances. Use your speed, use your firepower, attack from altitude, dive through the formation, and escape before the enemy can react. Simple doctrine, logical tactics, theories that evaporate the moment combat begins. Because the Japanese pilots don't cooperate with American doctrine. They bait, they provoke, they position themselves in ways that force decisions measured in heartbeats. A wingman in trouble, a crippled bomber under attack, a Zero seemingly vulnerable, presenting an irresistible target. And when the American pilot commits, when he banks hard to pursue or defend, the trap springs shut. Hayes has seen it happen. 3 weeks ago, he watched Captain Morrison, a veteran with 14 confirmed kills, get drawn into a turning engagement trying to save a damaged B-24. Morrison followed doctrine perfectly, right up until the moment doctrine became irrelevant. The Zero he was chasing simply turned tighter, faster, impossibly quick. Within seconds, Morrison went from predator to prey. His P-38 fell into the ocean trailing black smoke, and Hayes had to break off his own attack run to avoid the same fate. The psychological toll is crushing. Every pilot climbing into a P-38 knows they're flying an aircraft that performs worse where it matters most. They know the doctrine. They know the statistics. They know that engaging in a turning fight means death. But they also know that war doesn't allow you to simply refuse engagement. There are missions to fly, bombers to escort, enemies to intercept, and the Zero pilots are masters at creating situations where following doctrine means abandoning your wingman or watching bombers fall. The frustration manifests in different ways. Some pilots become reckless, almost suicidal, trying to prove they can beat the Zero at its own game. Most die quickly. Others become paralyzed by caution, so afraid of entering a turn that they hesitate at critical moments. They survive longer but become ineffective, breaking off from engagements where split-second aggression might have secured victory. Hayes falls into a third category, the pilots who follow orders perfectly and hate themselves for it. He's survived by being disciplined, by refusing to take bait, by abandoning advantageous positions the instant they threaten to become turning engagements. His survival rate is excellent. His kill rate is mediocre. He goes to sleep every night knowing he's alive because he's cautious, and he wakes up every morning wondering if caution is just another word for cowardice. Down in the maintenance area, McKenna watches these psychological casualties as closely as he monitors mechanical ones. He sees the tension in pilots, shoulders before missions. He hears the forced laughter that sounds more like desperation than humor. He notices how Hayes's hands shake slightly when he signs off on the pre-flight inspection. McKenna understands something the pilots don't quite grasp yet. This isn't just a tactical problem. It's a mechanical failure masquerading as pilot inadequacy, and he's beginning to understand exactly what that failure is. At 11:47 p.m., on August 19, 1943, James McKenna commits what could be considered treason in wartime. He stands alone in the maintenance hangar, surrounded by the hulking shadows of P-38s, holding a piece of piano wire and a pair of pliers. The base is quiet except for the distant sound of generators and the occasional call of night birds in the jungle beyond the airstrip. He's identified the problem. After weeks of obsessive investigation, measuring cable tensions, testing control surface responses, comparing specifications against actual performance, McKenna has found the flaw that's been killing American pilots. It's almost laughably simple. The control cables running from the cockpit to the ailerons and elevators have developed slack, not much, perhaps a quarter inch, maybe less in some aircraft. But that tiny amount of loose cable translates into a delay between pilot input and aircraft response. A quarter of a second, that's all it takes. In that fraction of time, the Zero completes another degree of turn, shifts position, lines up its guns. The P-38 pilot pulls his stick, expecting immediate response, but the aircraft hesitates. The slack must be taken up first, the cables must tighten, and only then do the control surfaces move. By that time, the advantage has shifted. The killing shot has been fired. McKenna has reported his findings through proper channels. He's written detailed reports. He submitted them to engineering officers who nodded politely and filed them away. The response, when it came, was predictable. Modifications to flight-critical systems require approval from Lockheed Engineering, testing protocols, formal authorization through the chain of command. The process could take months, maybe longer. Men are dying weekly. The piano wire in McKenna's hand is salvaged from a destroyed aircraft, recycled material that officially doesn't exist in any inventory. If he uses it to create tensioning devices for the control cables, he'll be modifying military aircraft without authorization, court-martial offense, potentially dishonorable discharge. In wartime, possibly execution for sabotage if something goes catastrophically wrong. But McKenna keeps thinking about Hayes, about Morrison, about the 5 men buried this week and the dozens more who'll follow if nothing changes. He thinks about the expression on Hayes's face this morning, that mixture of resignation and suppressed terror that comes from knowing you're climbing into an aircraft that won't respond fast enough when you need it most. The modification itself is elegant in its simplicity. Small tensioning devices installed at key points in the cable runs, taking up the slack, creating immediate response between control input and surface movement. McKenna has calculated the tensions carefully, tested them on a grounded aircraft, verified that the cables can handle the additional stress. He's as certain as he can be that it will work, but certainty and proof are different things. If he's wrong, if the modification causes a control failure in flight, Hayes will die because of him. If he's right but gets caught before the modification proves itself, he'll be court-martialed for tampering with flight systems. If he does nothing, Hayes and countless others will keep dying because of a flaw that everyone acknowledges, but nobody has authorization to fix. McKenna takes a breath and moves toward Hayes's aircraft. The decision is made. He'll start with one P-38, Hayes's aircraft. If it works, if the modification proves itself in combat, he'll quietly spread it to other aircraft. If it fails, at least only one pilot will pay for his unauthorized innovation. The work begins in silence, interrupted only by the metallic click of tools and the pounding of McKenna's own heart. At 6:15 a.m. on August 20th, 1943, Robert Hayes performs his pre-flight walk-around with the same mechanical precision he's developed over 6 missions. He checks the propellers, examines the landing gear, inspects the control surfaces. Everything appears normal. He has no idea that his aircraft has been fundamentally altered during the night. McKenna watches from a distance, trying to appear casual while his stomach churns with anxiety. He slept perhaps 2 hours, spending most of the night completing the modification, and then obsessively rechecking every connection, every tension point, every possible failure mode. The piano wire tensioners are invisible unless you know exactly where to look. The control cables appear standard, but the slack is gone. Hayes climbs into the cockpit. McKenna's hands clench involuntarily. This is the moment where everything could go catastrophically wrong. Hair cable could snap under the increased tension. A tensioner could fail during high G maneuvers. The control surfaces could bind or respond unpredictably. McKenna has tested everything he can test on the ground, but flight conditions introduce variables he can't fully predict. The engines roar to life. Hayes runs through his checklist, testing controls. McKenna holds his breath. The ailerons move smoothly. The elevators respond. Nothing binds. Nothing breaks. Hayes gives the thumbs-up signal to the ground crew and begins his taxi to the runway. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Escort a formation of B-24 bombers to hit Japanese supply lines near Rabaul. 4 P-38s, 8 bombers. Expected enemy fighter resistance. Standard operation, standard risks. Hayes is flying as wingman to Captain Mitchell, who survived 11 missions through a combination of skill and religious adherence to doctrine. McKenna can't watch the takeoff. He retreats to the maintenance hangar, ostensibly to work on another aircraft, but mostly to avoid the crushing weight of what he's done. If Hayes dies today because of the modification, McKenna will have murdered him as surely as if he'd sabotaged the aircraft deliberately. The fact that his intentions were good will mean nothing to a court-martial board or to his own conscience. The hours crawl past with agonizing slowness. Radio chatter from the mission crackles through the base communications center, but the actual combat happens beyond McKenna's hearing, in a sky he can't see, under conditions he can't control. He works mechanically on routine maintenance tasks, his mind entirely focused on a pilot who doesn't even know he's flying a modified aircraft. At 10:23 a.m., the radio reports contact with enemy fighters. Zeros, at least 6 of them, attacking the bomber formation from multiple angles. The P-38s engage. Standard defensive tactics. Protect the bombers. Maintain speed advantage. Avoid turning engagements. But war is never standard. Through the fragmented radio transmissions, McKenna pieces together what's happening. Mitchell's aircraft has taken hits. He's breaking off, trailing smoke. Hayes is alone, protecting the bomber formation's left flank. 3 Zeros converging on his position. The kind of tactical nightmare that doctrine says to escape from immediately. Hayes doesn't run. For the first time in his combat career, Lieutenant Robert Hayes turns to fight, and his aircraft responds like it never has before. The change happens in the span of 3 seconds, but for Robert Hayes, those 3 seconds redefine everything he thought he knew about aerial combat. The first Zero comes in high, diving toward the bombers with the aggressive confidence of a predator that's never met real resistance. Hayes banks hard left, pulling the stick with the same motion he's performed dozens of times before. But this time, something is different. The P-38 responds instantly. No lag, no hesitation. The aircraft rolls precisely when he commands it, the control surfaces biting into the air with immediate authority. Hayes doesn't have time to analyze the difference. He's already adjusting, his muscle memory recalibrating to match the aircraft's new responsiveness. The Zero pilot, expecting the typical sluggish American response, finds himself in the wrong position. Hayes's lightning completes its turn a half-second faster than it should, and that half-second puts Hayes inside the Zero's turning circle for a brief, precious moment. He fires. Tracers arc across the sky. The Zero breaks hard right, abandoning its attack run, suddenly defensive instead of offensive. Hayes feels something he hasn't felt in 6 missions, tactical equality. For the first time, he's not flying a compromised aircraft trying to compensate for mechanical inadequacy. He's fighting. The second Zero attacks from below, a classic maneuver designed to force the P-38 into a climbing turn where the Zero's agility advantage becomes insurmountable. Hayes pulls back on the stick, starting the climb, and again feels that immediate, precise response. The aircraft doesn't wallow, it doesn't hesitate. It climbs and turns simultaneously with a crispness that shouldn't be possible. The Zero pilot commits to the pursuit, expecting to outturn the American easily, but Hayes's aircraft is already rotating faster than the Japanese pilot anticipated. The geometry shifts. The Zero's advantage evaporates. Hayes rolls inverted at the top of his climb, spots the Zero below him, and dives with his guns blazing. The Zero explodes in a ball of orange flame and black smoke. Hayes's first kill, after 6 missions of cautious survival, of following doctrine to the letter, of watching other pilots die while he played it safe. He's finally drawn blood. But there's no time for celebration. The third Zero is already maneuvering for position, and the bomber formation is still vulnerable. What happens next defies everything Hayes learned in training. He engages the Zero in a turning fight, deliberately, aggressively, the kind of combat doctrine explicitly forbids. But his P-38 is responding like a different aircraft, turning tighter than he thought possible, answering his inputs with mechanical precision that transforms the engagement from survival exercise to genuine dogfight. The Zero pilot is skilled, experienced, confident. He's won dozens of turning engagements against P-38s. He knows the American aircraft's limitations intimately, but today, those limitations don't exist. The P-38 matches his turns, mirrors his maneuvers, refuses to fall behind in the deadly spiral of action and reaction that defines close combat. After 45 seconds of intense maneuvering, Hayes gets his shot. The Zero takes hits across its engine cowling and left wing. It doesn't explode, but it breaks off, trailing smoke, limping back toward Japanese-held territory. Hayes doesn't pursue. The bombers need protection, and Mitchell's damaged aircraft needs an escort home. But as Hayes reforms on the bomber formation, checking his fuel and ammunition, he realizes something profound has changed. Not just in his aircraft, but in himself. For 6 missions, he's been a survivor. Today, for the first time, he became a fighter. He has no idea why his P-38 suddenly performs differently. But he knows with absolute certainty that whatever changed has just saved his life. McKenna is waiting on the tarmac when Hayes's P-38 touches down at 11:47 a.m. The landing is smooth, controlled, the aircraft showing no signs of mechanical stress or abnormal behavior. McKenna's relief is so intense it makes his knees weak, but he forces himself to maintain the appearance of routine professional interest as Hayes taxis to his parking position. The moment the engines shut down, Hayes is out of the cockpit, his face flushed with adrenaline, and something McKenna hasn't seen in weeks: genuine excitement. The young pilot is gesturing animatedly to the other returning crews, describing maneuvers, explaining angles of attack, his hands tracing paths through the air that illustrate combat geometry. McKenna approaches with his maintenance clipboard, ostensibly to conduct the post-flight inspection. Hayes barely notices him at first, still caught up in recounting his engagement. 2 confirmed kills, 1 probable, no damage to his aircraft. Mitchell made it back safely, despite his hits. The entire mission, despite the intense combat, resulted in 0 American losses. The aircraft performed perfectly, Hayes tells McKenna, finally acknowledging the mechanic's presence. Better than perfectly. I don't know what happened up there, but everything just responded. Like the P-38 finally woke up. McKenna nods, making notes on his clipboard, keeping his expression carefully neutral. Any control issues, stiffness, binding, unusual feedback? The opposite, Hayes says, his enthusiasm undiminished. The controls felt crisp, immediate. I've never experienced response like that. It was like the aircraft was reading my mind. McKenna conducts his inspection methodically, checking the modifications carefully while appearing to perform standard maintenance procedures. The piano wire tensioners are intact, still maintaining proper cable tension. No signs of stress or failure. The system worked exactly as he'd hoped, and more importantly, it survived combat conditions without compromising safety. But McKenna says nothing. He files his maintenance report, notes the aircraft as fully functional, and returns to the hangar. The modification remains his secret, at least for now. Over the following days, a pattern emerges. Hayes flies 3 more missions. His kill count rises to 6. His confidence transforms from cautious competence to aggressive capability. Other pilots notice the change, attribute it to Hayes finally finding his combat rhythm, overcoming whatever psychological barrier had been holding him back. McKenna watches and learns. The modification works. More importantly, it works consistently under varied combat conditions. High G turns, rapid reversals, sustained maneuvering combat, the tensioned cables handle everything without failure. Hayes's aircraft has become a test platform, proving a theory that official channels refused to consider. On August 27th, at 2:30 a.m., McKenna makes his next move. Captain Mitchell's P-38 receives the same modification. 3 days later, 2 more aircraft. McKenna works in darkness, moving between planes with practiced efficiency, installing the piano wire tensioners with surgical precision. Each modification takes approximately 40 minutes. Each one is meticulously documented in a private journal McKenna keeps hidden in his footlocker. He tells no one, not the pilots, not his fellow mechanics, certainly not the engineering officers who filed his initial reports away. The modifications spread through the squadron like a beneficial virus, invisible but transformative. Pilots begin reporting improved aircraft handling, kill ratios shift, American losses decrease while Japanese casualties mount. The P-38 pilots start winning turning engagements against Zeros. Something that should be impossible is becoming routine. And throughout the Pacific Theater, Japanese pilots begin filing confused reports about American aircraft suddenly performing beyond their documented capabilities. McKenna keeps working in silence, 1 aircraft at a time, saving lives through unauthorized innovation, while the official approval process remains stalled thousands of miles away in committee meetings and engineering reviews that move at peacetime speeds while men die at wartime rates. On September 3, 1943, Japanese Naval Air Service pilot Hiroshi Nakamura encounters something that shouldn't exist. He's a veteran with 19 confirmed victories, all against American aircraft. He knows the P-38's weaknesses intimately. He's exploited them successfully in every engagement he's fought. Today, that knowledge becomes worthless. The combat develops exactly as Nakamura expects. He baits the American pilot into a turning engagement, a tactical trap that's worked flawlessly for months. The P-38 takes the bait, banking hard to pursue. Nakamura begins his counter-turn, anticipating the moment when the American aircraft's sluggish controls will leave it vulnerable. He's executed this maneuver 40 times. It's never failed. This time, the P-38 stays with him through the turn. Not just stays with him, but actually gains position. Nakamura increases his bank angle, pulling harder, bleeding speed in the tight spiral that should give him insurmountable advantage. The American matches him degree for degree. Impossible. The P-38 cannot turn this tightly. Every intelligence report, every combat analysis, every captured technical manual confirms this. Yet here it is, defying documented reality. Nakamura breaks off the engagement, diving away, his confidence shaken for the first time in his combat career. He returns to base with 0 kills and a report that his superiors initially dismiss as combat stress or pilot error. But Nakamura isn't alone. Throughout the Pacific Theater, experienced Zero pilots are filing similar reports. The Americans have changed something. The P-38s are performing differently. Japanese intelligence officers analyze the reports with growing concern. No new aircraft variant has been identified. No major design changes have been observed. The P-38s look identical to previous models, yet their combat performance has shifted dramatically. In August, the kill ratio favored Japanese pilots 3-1. By mid-September, the ratio has reversed. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots proves devastating. The Zero's dominance in turning combat has been the foundation of their tactical doctrine for years. Pilots have trained extensively in dogfighting maneuvers, perfecting techniques that exploit the Zero's agility advantage. Their entire combat philosophy centers on drawing enemies into close-range turning engagements, where Japanese skill and aircraft performance guarantee victory. Now that guarantee is gone, pilots who once attacked P-38s with aggressive confidence become cautious, hesitant, constantly second-guessing their tactical decisions. Should they engage or evade? Will the turning fight work today or won't it? The uncertainty proves as deadly as any mechanical disadvantage. Some Japanese pilots adapt, developing new tactics that emphasize hit-and-run attacks rather than sustained dogfighting. Others refuse to accept the change, insisting that proper technique will still prevail, only to die proving themselves wrong. The elite units maintain effectiveness through superior training and experience, but the average pilot, who relied heavily on the Zero's turning advantage, finds himself suddenly vulnerable. By late September, the air war over the Pacific has fundamentally shifted. American bomber formations that once suffered catastrophic losses now complete missions with acceptable attrition rates. P-38 pilots, who survived through caution, now hunt aggressively. The skies that belong to Japan are becoming contested territory. And in maintenance hangars across the Pacific, mechanics whisper to each other about modifications that don't officially exist, about piano wire tensioners installed in darkness, about an unauthorized innovation that's changing the war one aircraft at a time.